Good morning, everyone. My name is John Turner from the Nebraska Investment Finance Authority, and joining me today is Kelly Schultz, also with NIFA. Thank you for attending today's webinar. This is part 2 of a new series we've started at NIFA, specifically targeted to property managers, but it's also open to anyone who wants to learn more about the topics that we have. Our first one was a couple weeks ago on eviction prevention, and that webinar was recorded and it's on our website at NIFA.org, and it's also available on YouTube if you go to our NIFA housing page. Today's webinar will be recorded and also available. And then in October we have 2 more. The first one is on domestic violence, and the fourth one is on human trafficking. If you want to register for those, go to our website as well. Today we're joined by some great panelists I'm very excited to talk to today to learn about the topic of tenant behavior, something probably any landlord out there has had to address and deal with issues regarding tenant behavior, and it can be very complicated. Sometimes it's a lot about communication, and you're going to hear today about specifics about mental health issues and substance abuse issues and just behaviors that can be challenging to deal with. We are joined by Kristin Nelson, who is the Emergency Services Director at Region 5 Systems. Arnold Remington is the Executive Director of the Targeted Adult Service Coordination Program. And Melissa Ripley is an officer with the Lincoln Police Department. So thank you all for joining us today. We do ask that if you have questions, type those into the question feature and we'll answer those at the end. And after everyone speaks, we are going to have a special guest from the metro area Continuum of Care for the Homeless to talk about some landlord incentives and an opportunity in Lincoln also. So without further ado, if everyone else could turn their cameras off, I am going to pull up Kristin's PowerPoint. And bear with me for a second. Let's do this. I want to get it started at the beginning. I don't want to spoil anything. All right, we're in full screen mode. All right, can you see it? Okay, Kristin, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here this morning. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, you can know a little bit more about mental health or behavioral health, and we can answer some questions for you. But what I have is about a 20-minute presentation about what is mental health, what can we do, signs and symptoms, and a little bit about stigma. So be sure to hang with me. Be sure to jot down those questions for the end. Arnold Remington, myself are both clinicians, and Officer Ripley will be here at the end to answer questions. So with no further ado, I'm going to click on to my next slide, John. And this is just the question that gets asked a lot. What is mental health? What is it? How do you get it? How do you catch it? How do you get rid of it? I've got a little 4-minute video. I'd like you to watch this video. And I believe it's 4 minutes, and it's going to do a better explanation than me. But with that being said, I'll have you watch the video, and then we'll talk a little more in detail about what is mental illness. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed that video, and it really does a much better job than I would in explaining what is mental illness. One of the things I really want to clarify, John, if you want to pop over to the next slide, is talking a little bit about what is mental illness, kind of continued. One of the things I'm really hopeful that our landlords and other folks can understand today is that mental illness is a brain disorder. I mean, I have a slide here in orange and gray, and it's talking about mental illnesses are health conditions involving changes in thinking, emotion, and behavior. Mental illnesses are associated with depression and or problems functioning. What I really want you to gather from that is that it is a brain disorder. A brain disorder is something I think we would all feel maybe a little more uncomfortable talking about. For instance, if I was to say to you, as in the video, you know, I'm experiencing, I've been diagnosed with diabetes, for instance, I would be something that would be pretty comfortable to say. In reverse, if I said to you, I have just been diagnosed with schizophrenia, it comes with a certain subset of fear, or what does that mean? And I think that can be scary to others. So one of the things I really like to talk about is when we're talking about mental illnesses, is talking about how many of our mental illnesses are cyclical. Meaning if I have mental illness, say I have depression. Depression can be seasonal and sometimes, which we call seasonal affective disorder, or in some cases, it can be affected by certain traumas. John was sharing before we got on the seminar this morning about a client who has been housed. And one of the things he said was the setback with this specific client was that he, I believe, said his TV broke. Well, that might have been one of his resources or his, positive resources that helped maintain his mental illness. So sometimes mental illnesses become quite scary and we get alarmed when we hear about it, and therefore landlords and other folks are uncomfortable because they don't know what it is. I think there's still a lot of questions, and maybe that will be a question we can ponder later, but when can we get to a place where we can start talking about a mental illness the same way we talk about a physical illness, in using the term brain disorder or super organ. I love that in the video, how she mentions that it's the super organ. I think when we are more comfortable talking about it, we're going to be a lot more comfortable sharing what it is, its pros, its cons, talking about when in fact we can do something about it, when in fact we have an opportunity for change. John, I'm going to have you move to the next slide. Normally I would have you guys be live and I could ask you this question, but one of the things I like to talk about is what is the difference between mental illness and a physical illness? The video really tipped you off, but what I really want to share more than that is that mental illness is something that is very common. 1 in 4 people is affected with mental illness. Yet at the same time, 60% of the elderly that we experience have had an episode with depression. But yet the thing that makes it different, John, if you'd pop to the next slide, is stigma. Stigma is really the difference between mental illnesses and physical illnesses. I always kind of like to share this brief story about my father. My dad's name is Ron, and my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And during that time, every neighbor came over, everybody, and he lives in a townhome area. Everybody came in, everybody brought casseroles, everyone was there to support my mom. He got through it. He is cancer-free today. I think we all just felt so grateful that he was here. Fast forward, he's 75 years old now and has been experiencing major depression after retirement. Let me just tell you, not one person came over, not one person brought a casserole. Nobody's comfortable in that moment sharing, hey, I am going through something. And not only was my dad not comfortable talking about it, but my mom wasn't comfortable. And take it a step further into my cousin's family, it was kind of like the little secret. We really wanted to make a point to say, this is, people, people like my dad, hardworking career, they don't get this. It's, it's the TV. And I really want to talk to you just really briefly about one of the things that I think, where does the stigma come from? Where does it come from? So there was a survey done by the Screen Actors Guild Association done, and what they did they went and looked at, I want to check my data. What they did, they went and checked through over 2,000 different videos, movies, television shows that depicted any mental illness. In those cases in which any mental illness or behavioral health issues were depicted, that 60% of those shown in a negative light, the worst case scenario, the scariest. There's some kind of obvious movies, Psycho, Sybil. I mean, you can go to these extremes. But what I really hope the takeaway from today is that that's not the common case. Actually, when we talk about dangerousness in mental illness, really the dangerousness that occurs from mental illness is really less common than you think. More often than not, the person, especially if we're talking about the diagnosis of schizophrenia, is more common that person is to be hurt than that person hurting you. But I think if you go to our TV and our video and our media, what they've shown us, it's the scary, horrible case of the scary mentally ill person. But again, that is really TV at its best. So that, again, if you want to look at that, it was the New Freedom Commission in 2003 that did that Screen Actors Guild on that data. It was very interesting. John, could I have you pop to the next slide? And then just a little bit of data on mental illness, the impact of mental illness. I won't read every slide to you, but that mood disorders and depression are the third most common cause of hospitalization in the U.S. for anyone between the ages of 18 to 44. I just think it's something we really want to kind of be aware of. I do have a little video if we have time to talk about how did we get here, but individuals living with mental illness face an increased risk of having chronic medical conditions. So in addition to having the mental health diagnosis, they also have an increase to the medical diagnoses, such as diabetes. We do know smoking is very common in people with mental illnesses. So they have many lung challenges and stuff for breathing. And I'm just gonna have you move on to the next slide, John. This is just a really great little video about kind of how did we get here. What I want you to understand is that mental illness has been around for a long time, but many of the laws, regulations, precedents, and different folks have had an impact on how did mental health and homelessness get tied together. So if we could, John, show that quick video. It's another 3-minute quick video. It's a little bit about how did we get here. So one of the things when we kind of talk about that mental illness and homelessness, I think this is just a really interesting kind of data fact. I kind of did a little bit of research to understand the connection between mental illness and homelessness. And in the general US population, 1% of the population is diagnosed with schizophrenia. So kind of 1%, if you can think of that number. But yet when we start talking about our homeless population, the people that we're not able to keep housed, 30% of that population is diagnosed with schizophrenia. So there's definitely a large connection between homelessness and mental health. And again, I think stigma leads to it. I also think a lot of the challenges we all face is understanding how treatable mental illnesses are, and that we really can do some different ways of talking to folks. I'm going to spend on the next few slides, I'll talk a lot about what we can do to help folks, because I mean, ultimately our goal in the mental health world, as well as I'm sure the landlord's goals, is to have a really good shared relationship where people can remain housed and in our communities, and also live a life that's worth living. I think so many times we are scared and we don't know what to do. And we're going to talk a lot about some of the services that are available throughout the state of Nebraska that can help be supports to keeping people housed, and really ultimately talking about recovery. Recovery is probably the one thing as we go through mental illnesses that we don't spend enough time on. We don't talk about that it's treatable in so many cases. One of the data points we look at specifically here in Region 5 is what we're calling kind of high users of services, the ones that are in the ERs, the ones that are in contact with law enforcement repeatedly over and over. Well, we've been keeping this data for years and years. And one of the things we look at is, who are these people? What are their diagnoses? What's going on? What are their challenges? So what we've found is that the people that we spent so much of our resources, and when I say resources, I'm meaning time, energy, medication, staffing, etc., are not the people we're serving today. So it leads you to the fact that it is possible. Recovery is possible. Mental illnesses are treatable. I've got a few slides here about how to help, things to do. I think there's sometimes the things we forget to do because we're not sure about this person. I'm not sure if I'm safe. So just a couple things. This is similar information I do when I do all of my trainings, but it's how to help. If you have to go to the residence and you need to talk to the person, the rentee, if you will, these are just some things that really can help. Is obviously introduce yourself. You think, I've been their landlord for 3 years. They know who I am. They may forget. It may be one of those really, really bad days. So always when you come upon them, say, hey, it's me, it's Kristin. I'm your landlord here. Using that triangular approach. Usually I would bring somebody up from the audience and show that example, but it's just not standing right in front of them to show any aggression. remember, if they're not comfortable with signs and symptoms, if they're experiencing signs and symptoms, I'm sorry, they may not know who you are. They may be aggressive. And if you stand kind of to the diagonal of them, you're not as likely to be hit or hurt. And again, always state why you're there. If you're there because of a noise complaint, if you're there because of a barking dog, just tell them why you're there. So often people are experiencing some paranoia, so they think you're there because somebody sent them from somewhere else. But if you can say, I'm here, we've had a complaint that the water was running, I'm here because any more information you can give them, the better outcome you're going to have. You can, if you're comfortable, if you know this is somebody that has some paranoia, hallucinations, or delusions, acknowledge that. But if you don't know that, obviously don't do that. Comply with a request unless you feel that's an unsafe. A simple request, sometimes people will say, is, how do you know my name? How do you know me? If you can feel comfortable saying that, tell them, well, I know about you because you've been running for me from the last 6 months. Or anything you can tell them. Again, just kind of keeping everything out front and in the open. Secrets become very scary, especially if there's any delusions or paranoia. That can compound the impact and ultimately result to them no longer being housed, which I believe that's all of our goals here today. If you want to just flip to the next slide, John. Again, anytime if they, for instance, would be rambling or kind of a food, or not food, they kind of call it like a speech where they're going on and on. You don't understand, you don't know, they're just talking. Really, if there's any opportunity to break up that speech pattern, just asking some questions. Hey, I just wanted to double check to see if you were having any issues with your mailbox, or is there any way you could get me a quick drink of water? I'm dying of thirst out here. Anything to kind of break that up can be extremely helpful for the consumer. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these. You can always ask if they happen to have a RAP plan, Wellness Recovery Action Plan. These are an amazing tools. Local law enforcement, they are using these with folks asking about them. A RAP plan is a plan that the consumer made for themselves to continue their wellness. And it's usually a plan that they keep in their kitchen. If you ask about the RAP plan, they may be willing to share that with you. They may not. But in any instance, the RAP plan can be a huge resource. On that RAP plan, it says who to call if I'm having a bad time, who to send my dog to, how to talk to me, things that are helpful, things that are hurtful. Usually they have an emergency sheet in the RAP plan. It's just a great resource. RAP is statewide. And again, it's WRAP, Wellness Recovery Action Plan. This is an excellent tool. Again, ultimate goal, keeping somebody housed. You can flip to the next slide, John. And then just some best practices. This is what the research tells us whenever we're dealing with somebody with any mental health, brain disorder, behavioral health. Obviously, never touch the consumer if at all possible. Don't make any promises you can't keep. I mean, if you tell them, I'm going to come back tomorrow at 2, really do make all efforts to be back there at 2. Threatening, any kind of threatening behavior. I, as a landlord, I'm a landlord myself, and it can be very frustrating if you don't think somebody's doing what you've asked them to do. A good question to ask is, what kept you from keeping your promise to? Asking them just a simple question. If they had agreed, for instance, they were going to manage the trash situation, what kept them from that? Sometimes it's a very logical answer. I couldn't do it because, my ankle's broken. I couldn't do it because. But in other instances, it's not that simple. And that might lead you to that question. And I think we had a debate on this, on whether or not we can ask this, but do you have anybody that helps you? Do you have anybody that regularly comes to visit you that could help you with this task? In many cases, that might be a case manager, or maybe a family friend, maybe even a peer. A peer is similar to a case manager, but in the difference between a peer and a case manager is often they have some lived experiences. And I think Arnold's going to talk a little bit about resources in his presentation, but I just think those are some things to really focus on. And again, in all cases where you are able to really tell them why you're there and what you're going to do, and kind of what your ultimate goal is for them. John, you want to flip to the next slide? I'm going to hand this over to Arnold, and he's going to talk a little bit about some services that are available, as well as some of the resources. But like as I said, if you're thinking of questions or anything, be sure to jot those down and send those to John, and we can answer specific questions at the end of the training. Right? All right, Arnold, all you.
Thanks, Kristin. John, you can leave it on this slide for a sec. I'm going to talk about case management first. First, I want to say thank you to all of you that are listening today that are property managers. Your role is very critical and important to the people that Kristin, myself, and Melissa all work with on a daily basis. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I'm the director of the TASC program, as John mentioned. We were established in 2005 when Nebraska passed LB 1083, which was behavioral health reform. And what that means is just the state made the decision to close some of our regional centers and move to community-based care. So every region in Nebraska is divided into 6 regions. Was asked to develop services in response to that. So the TASC program is one of those services that came up during that time. We provide crisis response teams and case management. I have 14 full-time case managers and 7 on-call counselors. And we cover the entire region, which John will have a map here in a sec, I think. There's the map. So if this is the state of Nebraska, we are in Region 5, the southeast area, and Region 5 consists of 16 counties. So our coverage area is all 16 counties. So I have case managers that travel across that area to serve individuals, to work with property managers across our region, and to help people reintegrate and maintain and thrive in whatever community they're in. To do that, we do that with case managers, and I want to talk generally about what case management is. So, because you're likely to come into contact with a case manager as a property manager. We have emergency case management, which is short-term crisis case management. This is offered throughout the state in every region. Typically, length of stay is around 90 days. Contacts are as much as needed for that individual. And with that model, what we're really doing is helping people that are coming right out of the emergency system. So people that have been in our crisis centers, hospitals, people that have had law enforcement contact, we're helping them get back on track from pre-crisis to post-crisis and hopefully stabilize to prevent future crisis. We also have something called long-term case management, which is sometimes some areas that could be intensive community services, intensive case management, and then there's also a long-term case management, which we call traditional case management. The difference, the intensive is typically more contacts, so 6 hours versus traditional is about 3 hours a month of contact, where a client and the case manager are meeting to work on individualized goals. The other model that you'll see is recovery focused or peer focused case management, and that has 2 kind of different models. One is the recovery focused is for an individual that's pretty stable but just needs some supports. It's typically 1 contact a month. And then the other is a peer supported service, which is just what it says. It's case management, or it's peer support. It's similar to case management, but it's a person with lived experience that is working with that individual to help meet needs. So those are the primary models. And I know in our discussion, we can talk more about this, but I encourage you as property managers, if a case manager is involved with one of your residents, to engage that case manager. Case managers can help with individuals that are dealing with crisis. So for instance, the resident that's talking to the neighbors or trying to go into other neighbors' apartment, the resident that is having difficulty with just basic needs that we all do, preparing food, cleaning the apartment, those type of things. Evictions, case managers can help avoid evictions. I mean, and we want to do that too for the resident, because that eviction makes it really difficult for an individual that's already dealing, as Kristin mentioned, with mental illness or substance abuse problems, and then now there's an eviction on their record. It really makes it difficult for them to move forward and to maintain stability. The other component that we provide is crisis response teams. And crisis response teams, I'm going to just give you an overview of the different models. We do a crisis response model, which is an independent program where you have most places use licensed clinicians, which we do. Some people will provide crisis response with non-licensed staff, but a crisis response model goes to the source. Our program is law enforcement only, so an officer would call us and we go out and work with that officer. Some crisis response models can be community-based, meaning any community member can access them. That crisis response is designed to be mobile and go out in person. We also have the Crisis Intervention Team Model, or CIT, which is a national model developed in Memphis, Tennessee in 1987. And it is a law enforcement crisis model. And what that means is law enforcement goes through a 40-hour training, and they assign what is called a CIT officer in charge, and they would take the lead. So when, say, a call comes to one of the properties of one of your individuals, the officer would arrive, and once they identify there's mental health involved, they would contact the CIT officer in charge, and then they take over from that point. They have specialized training in mental health and substance abuse. They do role playing. They are connected to providers, but it's law enforcement driven. Whereas the crisis response would do similar things, but crisis response pairs the officer and the clinician together, and then they work as a team. The other up and coming model that we don't really have here in Nebraska yet, but it's a co-responder model. It's pretty popular across the country. It's expensive to run, but what that means is you might have an officer and a clinician that ride in an unmarked vehicle together, and that clinician would be employed by the department, and they go out to calls. So when calls come into 911 and they're dispatched as mental health, that team would go out. Other variants of that are clinicians in EMT or clinicians in fire and rescue, and they're pretty effective models, and they're designed to maximize resources. So like with in Colorado, there's a fire and rescue model with the clinician. That team will go out rather than sending the whole fire crew out. And then if that team determines more assistance needed, then they can ask for that assistance. Most communities that have any form of crisis response will usually have all three models, and they all have limits. Like I said, the co-responder is expensive, so typically they only are operational during certain hours. They're not a 24/7 program. CIT and crisis response typically are 24/7 programs. So that is how those work, and I'm happy to answer more questions about that. And the main thing is that in the state of Nebraska, every region has these services available. So whether you own or a property manager in Lincoln or Scottsbluff or Hastings, there should be those services available. Crisis response is a great resource for law enforcement, and that's how I got to work with Melissa Ripley, who I'm going to turn it over to now.
Hey, Melissa, we can see you.
Okay, thanks, Arnold. My name is Melissa Ripley. I've been a police officer for 20 years here in Lincoln, and I also serve as the homeless liaison as well as the vice chair of the Lincoln Homeless Coalition. And I work on the coordinated entry team who we review the most vulnerable people in Lincoln that are currently experiencing homelessness and try to get them plugged into resources and housing. So I have quite a bit of experience with all of the resources that Lincoln has to offer and the models that we use here in Lincoln that are most conducive to what we're doing and responding to here. Lincoln has the behavioral health threat assessment training instead of the CIT training. Here in Lincoln, as officers, we're cross-trained, and so we basically respond to all different types of services, and we're all trained with mental health resources here. The beta training that Kristin has designed is a little more custom made for the Lincoln Police Department and how we operate versus some of the other larger police departments across the country. So the beta training consists of 40 hours of specialized mental health training, and we get to basically have an inside view of what happens in the mental health system. Sometimes as an officer, we're called to a situation that may result in us placing someone in an emergency protective custody or seeking further resources. And after we leave, we don't always know what happens to that person or what happens throughout the system. So this training provides us with an insight into that, as well as very specific detailed information of all of the resources throughout our community and what there is to offer in Lincoln, which we are very fortunate to have in Lincoln. We have a lot of very good resources that we can pull from. So oftentimes we respond to calls for service, for check welfares, for people that might be your tenants. And we're happy to work with you and provide as much information as we can as well. And if you're experiencing issues with certain tenants that may have mental health issues and you're not quite sure what to do or who to contact, a lot of times law enforcement can be that first line of contact, and we can then get that person hooked up with all of the many resources that we have throughout Lincoln, and what we usually know what would be best for them and what would suit them the best and what their needs might be. So we work together as a team here in Lincoln. That's one thing I like about our community, is that we're all very focused on what we can do best for that individual, not what's best for the agency or anything outside of the individual needs of that person. So that's kind of a thing that we have here in Lincoln that I think a lot of communities don't always experience. Lincoln, one other thing I'd like to say, just for landlord tenant issues, we also offer the crime mapping on the Lincoln Police Department website, where you can get an email notification every time the police are sent to the address that you own. It may give you a brief description of what's going on there, but you can always call and we can provide further information if you need to know what's going on with your tenants. And it's a really proactive way for landlords to be aware of what's going on in their buildings and who is utilizing the police services. And while they may contact us, that doesn't necessarily mean it was for something bad. They may have been a victim of something. They may not be causing trouble, that sort of thing. So it's always kind of nice to know, I think, as a landlord, who's doing what in your buildings. What are they contacting the police for? What are their needs? Is it a problem property that we're going out on constantly? And that way you can kind of be apprised of it and maybe take care of the problem before it even gets to be a bigger issue for the tenant and yourself, as well as the landlord. So I do like to stress, I've been a very strong advocate for a lot of years of breaking the stigma of mental health, and I try to educate the community as much as I can that we deal with people at all levels of mental health issues, whether they're just having a bad day all the way to psychotic episodes of schizophrenia, criminal behavior that might be driven by mental health issues and that sort of thing. So I really like to stress that mental health issues do not equal dangerousness. That's really not the case most of the time. Usually people may not be acting the same way that you or I are acting, but that doesn't make them a bad person or a dangerous person. They're just experiencing symptoms of their mental illness. And I think it's very important to be educated on what those look like, what the symptoms of certain disorders look like. A lot of times the medications that they're taking are causing horrible side effects. So it becomes an issue of a quality of life versus the symptoms of the mental health disorder, and having to choose between those sometimes is very hard for a person to do. So I think coming at it with a more empathetic, compassionate approach definitely helps the mental health consumers, and I think in turn then would help your relationship with your tenant as a landlord, in trying to come at them with a attitude of understanding rather than the alternative. So I hear a lot of people saying if we could just get people put into an apartment, that would be the end of all of their problems. They could then take care of whatever it is that they're experiencing. And a lot of times it's not that easy. As Kristin touched on, there are a lot of environmental factors that come into play. And sometimes the people who are choosing to live on the streets need that street noise and that interaction with whatever is going on in front of them just to survive on a daily basis. And putting them into an apartment where it's quiet and there's nothing to do necessarily, and there's nothing to keep their minds occupied, just exacerbates the mental health symptoms that they experience. And so sometimes it becomes a bigger challenge for them than even just living on the street. And that's hard for people to understand. Why wouldn't you want to be housed, or why wouldn't you want to be in an apartment if someone can provide that for you? It seems like an easy fix, and it just isn't that easy for people. So Lincoln does provide a lot of wraparound resources for those people that are housed. And so we try to, again, fit the tenant with the most needed resources that we can provide in order to make that a success. And we have had some good success in Lincoln with getting people housed and having them stay housed. One gentleman I can think of that John and I discussed earlier has thousands of police contacts multiple times a day on a daily basis while he was living on the corner downtown. And he's housed, and we haven't had very many police contacts with him since then. They've been very minimal. Some of them, are voluntary if we take him a meal on holidays or that sort of thing. But he's a completely different person now that he's housed, and he likes to just sit and watch TV and enjoys his political news, which is hopping at the moment. And so, but for that, to see that that person become successful and not someone that we go out on multiple times a day it's a huge success for us. So it can happen, it does happen, and we would love the landlords to be a part of that as well.
That's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. The situation you just talked about was also a housing first situation where it saved the city a lot of money, because the cost of him going to the emergency room, via ambulance, going to detox, at the bridge, behavioral health, hospital bills, and really, so just to give people a background who I haven't met that are on this call, I used to work at Region 5 Systems, and I ran their housing program. So this team that we're listening to today, I worked very closely with this team, and we had some very challenging situations and some great rewarding ones. But that one probably was one of the most rewarding, because I remember hearing that we tried to house him for 3 years before he wanted to be housed. And it was when he went to a nursing home and he didn't want to return to the streets when he said, okay, let's, I'll move into a place if you can find one. And another great thing about that relationship is the landlord became kind of part of the team. We were always really good about everyone having their roles, and we don't expect landlords to be social workers. The case managers, we have folks that are trained in all these different areas, but this particular landlord was really good at communicating to us or to the case manager when something wasn't right. Kristin mentioned there were 2 scenarios where this person's drinking got really erratic, and there was obviously a change. And when we boiled it down, we realized it was his TV was broken one time, and then the next time his air conditioner broke. But instead of like calling and asking for help, he just kind of was, well, I'll just kind of drink to numb, and it's so hot out, I'll just pass out instead. So yesterday when we did a practice for this, we talked about, I think Kristin talked about that quick intervention, recognizing something and acting on it quickly. We also talked about when landlords meet tenants and you're signing that lease, make sure your rules are very clear. And sometimes a case manager might be there with you, right? I know that when we ran our housing program, sometimes the case manager was part of the lease signing process. And then that fosters this open communication. Let's see, there's different scenarios I was thinking of. One of them, you talked about resources in Nebraska. During our last webinar, we talked about community action agencies. And it's nice when community action agencies and behavioral health providers work well together as well, because the behavioral health provider might be focusing on more mental health issues, RAP plans, medications, making sure people are in counseling, where a community action might be more of that generalist kind of resource for food and paying utilities, clothing, things like that maybe can alleviate some stress. And if you get that relationship going, that can be very helpful too. Melissa,
can I just touch on?
Oh, go ahead.
I just want to touch on just the idea of someone's TV breaking and how you or I might handle that, and that's really not a big deal in the big scheme of life. We can all Google what to do to fix it or take it somewhere and just get it fixed or get a new TV. But for someone experiencing severe mental health issues, that is the big factor that's going to start the whole snowball effect. And the TV being broken is going to start the drinking, which is going to start the non-payment of rent, which is going to start the eviction, and it just goes downhill from there. So if we can stop that problem at the very beginning with just a broken TV with an easy fix for all of us, that's a huge issue that we can overcome, and then therefore we don't have to have that snowball get started rolling down the hill. So little things can become huge in the life of people experiencing mental health issues because maybe they don't have the coping skills or just the wherewithal that they need to get through that, where it might not be a big deal for us, but little things, sometimes being out of cigarettes or just very small things, big stressors. It gives you a different perspective of what you're dealing with.
Yeah. I thought of two things, and we do have a couple of questions, but I thought maybe I'd keep this discussion going first. Kristin, you mentioned loneliness yesterday when we talked, and you want to talk a little bit about that?
I think we're kind of talking about a specific client when we were talking a little bit about loneliness. We had a young man we had got housed who had been pretty chronically homeless. But then what we kind of encountered with him, his case manager continued to call and say, he's still living on the streets. He's still, going to the food pantries. But I think what we all found to be true about him was that for many of us, living alone is kind of the goal, the dream. But for him, it was that social isolation was worse. I mean, it was better to be homeless than to be socially isolated. And, we could get into the extrovert, introvert. I'm pretty extroverted. I would not want to live alone. I've never lived alone for 3 seconds. And I don't really hope I ever have to be frank. But, but I have a husband who could easily, we could even talk about Corona. For some, this was a moment of discovery, a moment of like, look at me, I got peace and quiet, and I got to center myself. For the extroverts out here, it was not that way. I was missing friends, family, activities, social events. So when you're thinking about clients, sometimes we have to look at it not always from our vision, because if I look at it my extrovert way, I think everybody's social and everybody wants to be doing stuff. So loneliness is a huge factor. And again, I just want to talk about mental illness is so cyclical. Just because you have major depression or schizophrenia doesn't mean your symptoms are always present. They can come and go. They can be, seasonal. They can be from time to time. They can be stress induced, family induced. For many of the folks we serve, there's just a chronic history of poverty and kind of, family trying to borrow money. Man, can I borrow 20 bucks? Mom really needs it, but I need 20 bucks to pay my cable bill that keeps me afloat or my medication copay. So some of those factors really do play in. So, if you can ever do a quick response, just a quick, what's really going on? Like last 6 months have been great. What is there just something going on that I could maybe help with? No guarantees, but I think if you could just as simply ask the question, I used to work for Arnold as a crisis response therapist for years. And I mean, sometimes it was the basic reason, you know, what brought me out here today? Well, my mom's a, you know, blah, 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 you know, okay. So what do you want to do with mom? Well, nothing. I just want her to know. Okay, let's tell her and then move on, you know, so we could move to that next step. And I think that's so often, but I think certainly in that landlord tenant relationship, we get overwhelmed as other tenants have called, other situations. So I know in not every case you could do that, but if there's ever a moment where you can just simply say, hey, what's going on? And like give them a moment to let them answer, I think we can come up with some really great solutions that are very similar. You know, the cable TV, my water bill, I had to lend my brother $10, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's good. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and go through some of these questions now while we have this discussion going. The first one is, I know that the mayor's office has set aside $150,000 to assist in mental health calls. What would your recommendations be for the use of those funds?
I'm just going to go off what Kristin touched on and you touched a little. I think with COVID, it's the social supports. One of the things I saw that I really, to be honest, I've done this for a long time and I didn't realize how critical a role we all play, but the social supports. We have individuals, we call them clients, you call them tenants, that have done really, really well, lived independent for a long time. But once COVID came, like the rest of us, your world's kind of thrown upside down. And I think what we saw is an increase in symptoms. I saw how much dependence individuals had on case managers, therapists, you know, even just lack of technology. So when you're in a world that's moving to Zoom and video conferencing and you don't have those resources, when we have a world that's out of toilet paper and your resource to get that toilet paper isn't coming to your house anymore, it's a whole different world. So I think I would like to see resources go to supporting the independence of individuals through social, professional, and even, you know, property managers that are going out and checking on properties. I think what I felt and what I observed is there is a greater dependence on that than I would have ever imagined for individuals. I think Melissa did a nice job talking about, you know, just the basic stuff that we all deal with every day can literally be a life and death crisis for an individual that's dealing with mental health or substance abuse problems.
I think I would really compound on what Arnold said. I mean, I think if the mayor is setting aside some money, I think it's really going to come down to one-to-one, some ability for people to go out and do one-to-one, face-to-face with clients, and two, that emergency resource. I mean, I can't tell you how many of our clients pick up little tiny part-time jobs. You know, maybe they're an Uber driver a couple nights a week. Maybe they wait tables a couple nights, or they do dishes a couple nights just to do a little extra income here and there. Those jobs went away. A young man I work with regularly, he did some side painting jobs, and he, you know, nobody was letting in your house. And so that little, it doesn't seem like that much, but that $200, that was his lifeline. So that's gone. And so it's stuff like that. So when I really think about that money, that $200 covers, you know, even if you're on Medicaid, there's still copays. There's still, you know, $5 copays for your meds. There's still gasoline in your car, you know, I mean, and if, you know, I know the buses are free in Lincoln, but if you're out in our rural areas, you're still having to drive into town. You're still having to do, you know, drive into the grocery store. And if you're like me, I mean, Arnold mentioned the toilet paper and we all chuckled, but it was a for real thing. There was no toilet paper for a minute. And then, but think if you have to drive 60 miles and you drove into town, your nearest grocery, and it's not there, that's, I don't know, I mean, gas, that's probably a $12 drive round trip. Well, now I got to go back tomorrow. So it's those little, again, there are the big ones, there are the big cases, but in so many, it was the more minute, small, quick access to diapers, quick access to some stuff, you know, food packages, especially when the schools were closed. I think somebody brought up Wi-Fi. I think I take for granted personally how many people didn't have Wi-Fi and how many people used free Wi-Fi. McDonald's, Burger King, Scooters all have free Wi-Fi. You know, I mean, everybody probably has Facebook and has seen the video of the kids sitting outside McDonald's because they left their Wi-Fi on initially. You know, I mean, those are the little heart-touching moments where if you could do something small, I mean, McDonald's just left their Wi-Fi on so people could sit outside and still use Wi-Fi. I mean, I'm not a big McDonald's person, but wow, thank you for doing that.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for answering that question. It's great to know that that resource is out there. And so I would imagine that's something to think about. Maybe reach out if you have the connections to that. Anyone within the mayor's office, if you want to provide your input. So let's see, we have another one here, which as I read this, I think of landlords I've worked with and, challenges, and they were challenges for me too. I will say Kristin was always great at derailing somebody when they would really just kind of go off into this other world of delusional thinking. I would kind of get caught up in it, but she would always just put the kibosh on it, say, look, we got to talk about this. I was always liked it when you helped me with that. So this is similar. Tenant rambles, unrecognizable communication, but is not disruptive. Concern is to have a better quality life. Alcoholic tenant is disruptive, disturbing other tenants, but does not acknowledge this is a problem. Kind of like when you see someone who's a hoarder and you say, this is an issue, and they're like, what are you talking about? I mean, what kind of advice do you have for this landlord? And
I think we let Melissa start on that. That's kind of a call you're probably going to get called to first.
And that's a very common call for us. We try to diffuse the situation with as least amount of force as possible. We try to de-escalate just verbally, try to find another solution that doesn't involve jail or detox or anything like that. So we always go about it with the least amount first. If that doesn't work, obviously there's some other steps that we can take, but we really want to get that person plugged into some other community resources to find out the why of what's happening. Until we get to that part of it, then I think we're just kind of putting a Band-Aid on a situation that the Band-Aid's never going to be big enough. So really finding out why this is occurring and what's going on with that person's life is a big part of what we need to do when we respond, and how we can get them plugged into the best resources that we have in the community, whatever that might be for that specific person. So it can be a difficult population to work with, but we do our best to find the most reasonable solution for everyone, including the landlord. And we always value your property and your time and input as well.
I got a call a long time ago when I was working for Arnold as a crisis response therapist, and it was an apartment complex. And it was really one of those times where I thought law enforcement just went above and beyond. But it was an apartment complex. I want to say it was like an 8-plex. And the situation was loud music, a loud music complaint. And it was blaring, because when I got there, the music, I mean, you could hear it. You could hear it in your car when you pulled in. And the gentleman was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He shared that with us. And he said, the loud music really helps me. It helps me kind of drown out other issues. So we're talking. The sweet officer said, have you ever thought about wearing headphones? And the guy's like, yeah, I used to, they broke. He said, well, I'm gonna run up to the Walmart and I'm gonna get you a pair of headsets. And I thought, are you really gonna do this? And he was like, yeah, because this solves all my problems tonight. I won't have to go back. I won't have to, you can look at that a million ways, but in the end, that was a quick solve. I mean, I don't know what a headset costs, 20 bucks, 15 bucks, problem solved. A crisis response counselor was called out, when you start talking about dollars. And I know as landlords are like, some of that system problems, but some of this is all of our problems. Crisis response counselor is a couple $100 an hour. An officer is a couple $100 an hour, if not more. I mean, ambulance, if they would have been EPC'd, if there would have been tickets filed. And in the end of the day, a $20 headset solved the issue. I mean, that is just one of those moments where not everybody can do that in that moment, but if you can, think about like, what is the real problem? And so like, to the question, when I get called out about something, I'm always like, what can I do for you? That kind of true customer service. what, you know, a barking dog, the water's running, my neighbors are too loud, I'm too loud, you know, whatever, to stop the rambling. What can I do for you? What can I do for you? And kind of returning and being a little bit direct. People will say it's bitchy or something, but it's okay. I think you just really want to drive back to what can I do for you so we're not back out here tonight, even if it's something as simple as buying a headset, because it really did solve the problem. I don't know that it's a permanent fix, but it certainly was a quick fix in that interim moment.
Well, I think I would
And
add.
I think sometimes just asking.
Go ahead, Melissa.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Yep, go.
I think sometimes asking people what they want out of the situation is good. Sometimes people who are involved in the mental health industry as a consumer feel like they get told what to do. Their therapist is telling them what to do, how to be successful, what they need to do to make their life work. And a lot of times they're not asked what they want to do. And so that can be a very powerful question to ask someone, and sometimes overwhelming for them because they don't always get that opportunity to express what they want. And so, you know, sometimes just asking someone, what do you want to do here? Well, I just want to ride to the park. Done. I mean, we can make that happen very easily. So just sometimes posing that question and giving them a little bit of power in that situation can be helpful as well.
I would add to that, and I think even to the point prior to law enforcement getting involved, kind of Kristin hit on this, it's just the basic needs. I mean, sometimes, you know, I think of the Hulk, the hungry, angry, lonely, tired metaphor, and sometimes it's that simple. If a person, you know, we've had an individual that was in crisis, and you know what saved him? We bought him 2 McDonald's cheeseburgers, and he was golden. He hadn't eaten. He was hungry. Those type of calls are probably not going to come from the individual. They're going to come from your other tenants. The person's out blaring their radio like Kristin talked about, or they're talking to themselves on their balcony. But if that person isn't sleeping, or maybe they just had a med change and they're having a reaction to the med. I mean, so I think being able to ask basic questions to find out, as Kristin and Melissa both said, what's really going on here? Because a lot of times those are preventable calls that you don't need to escalate to law enforcement involvement. But it takes time, and you got to be purposeful in what you're doing, and not just assume something's wrong. I don't want this person here.
I definitely heard a theme that made me think of the mayor's funding, but having some flexible resources to buy toilet paper, to buy headphones, to deal with things like that. Let's see, do you have any nuisance orders or any kind of crime-free ordinances related to rental housing in your region? If yes, do you think these ordinances are helpful or unhelpful? Yeah,
I don't know.
the only thing I can think of is, what is the, in Lincoln, if a landlord, if his property, if the police come to his property, he could get a ticket after a certain number of times if it's a disruptive property or something like that?
Yeah, and there's no set number of times. Basically, what we will do is, if we are repeatedly coming to the same address for the same people and the same problem, we'll send a letter out letting the landlord know, hey, this is what's going on at your property. These are the people that we're dealing with and how many times we've been out in, you know, say a 30 or 60-day period. We then give you the opportunity to contact us, to work with us to find a solution, you know, so that we're all living in a better community. And so that's obviously our goal. Ultimately, if that goes ignored and we continue having problems, the landlord can ultimately be cited for whatever the issues are occurring at the home. Most likely it would be maintaining a disorderly house. But we want to resolve it before we ever get anywhere close to that point. And usually we do. I've never personally cited a landlord for that issue because we can always get it resolved beforehand.
Okay. I do remember that, you know, a lot of times we think that people have friends live with them because they want that friend to live with them, or they have extra family that are there, and that obviously they're not on the lease, so they're at risk of eviction. But there are times where our tenants are being taken advantage of, and people kind of encroach their property and they can't get rid of them. So I know there's been talk about having some kind of, you know, ban and bar or trespassing rules, and it's an interesting discussion, because in one way, you know, we don't want to see people, get evicted, but some tenants are asking the service provider, help, this person won't leave. And that happens more than you think.
I would add too, on the other end, John, we talked about this a little yesterday. I think a lot of the people I've worked with over the years, our program has worked with, they don't move. If they have the right supports, they really like to stay where they're at, and they're good tenants, they're good neighbors. But that doesn't mean they were always that way, and that doesn't mean they don't have the occasional police call, or they don't have the occasional episode where they're talking or get intoxicated or something. But they've got the supports in place, and that usually comes from partnerships with law enforcement, with case managers, and the property manager working together. We have lots of cases of success stories like that. But we tend to focus, like everybody, on the ones that are the headaches that we don't get to that point because we're in the front end of it. And those are the hard ones. We have a lot of people that we deal with, that you're all dealing with, that don't have much rental experience or much positive rental experience, and they're really struggling with their illness. But that doesn't mean they can't be one of those individuals like John and Kristin talked about at the start of this presentation today. There's lots of success stories out there of people that have made it through, and I really think the key word is partnership. And from a property management perspective, I encourage all of you to reach out. If you know there's a case manager involved, ask the client to give you permission to talk to that person. Have them be involved. It really, we can work together and help people be successful.
Yeah, that's great. A great point. And if you have your tenant, or if a case manager's out there listening and they have a client living in an apartment, it's okay to just have them sign a release that basically acknowledges that I'm a case manager for this person. You don't have to check the boxes of, what my diagnosis is and what my treatment plan is, but at least the landlord can call you and say, hey, this tenant is struggling. Can you help me help them? And sometimes just a simple release that just at least recognizes that they are under your care, I guess. This is a question for you, Melissa. It says, what is the program that you have that allows the landlords to get the text message with police contact, and how would that get started with local departments? I think that's what you were referring to.
Yes, and it's unique to Lincoln as far as I am aware. It was a program that we piloted here years ago, and basically it's an email service where you can sign up to receive emails, and it's ran through our dispatch center. So every time we get a call for service, it's obviously logged to that address, and then you receive an email saying that there was a call at this address with a very brief description. It might just say it was a disturbance or a check welfare, that sort of thing, and which apartment it went to. So that's something that we've offered here in Lincoln for several years, and most of the landlords that I know here in Lincoln use that service and want to know, what's going on at their properties. And so a lot of times they'll call and want a little more information because it doesn't give you a whole lot on the email. But that's something that our management team could provide more information on. I can give John my email if he wants to have somebody get a hold of me. I can get more information to you after we're done today.
Okay, great, thanks. Here's a question about youth. We really haven't talked about youth. I know we spent a lot of time at my last job talking about 18, 19-year-olds renting. This just says, what about youth with mental health and households renting? We have, that's like what Arnold mentioned. Some people have no experience renting. So with that, RentWise is a great tool that we have throughout Nebraska to help teach tenants to be better tenants and how to understand a lease. And so that's a great resource. That's also a population that I saw, and I hear from partners around, it's hard to live alone at that age. Any comments?
I would add, John, I think like everything, and Melissa mentioned this earlier, it's what's the backstory? Because unfortunately, we do have, we're dealing with, Kristin and I are working with an individual right now in that situation, and you have state wards that age out of the system that their entire life have been in foster home or group homes with supports, and they don't have those skills, and suddenly they turn 19 and you're on your own. Same thing with adults that have spent years in group homes or state institutions that are suddenly in the community. It's not their fault. They don't have that experience, but they're in that situation, and they are challenging. And I think our success stories have really come from property managers that partner with that individual's team and work together. And sometimes it's partnering with law enforcement, being proactive. Those are individuals John mentioned earlier that I think typically get taken advantage of. So suddenly, you know, John's got an apartment, he just turned 19, and now John's 12 friends that he talked to for 30 seconds at the bus station are all living there because he's got an apartment. That happens. So I really think it's the finding the backstory, and then how do you work together to support this person so they're successful?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of housing resources in Lincoln for youth in this area through Cedars Youth Services, and they do provide a lot of wraparound services for those youth that are, you know, aging out of whatever system they had been in, and then trying to get into the rent world, you know, as a tenant now as an adult when they might only be, you know, 18 or 19 years old. So there are resources for that. There are also resources for families that have youth experiencing mental health issues while they're living in one of your properties, and those can be accessed through law enforcement as well, you know, as some other agencies, but there are actually quite a few resources for youth experiencing mental health issues in Lincoln.
Yeah, and Nebraska was awarded, well, rural Nebraska, so the balance of state continuum of care was awarded the Youth Homeless Demonstration Program, and so there's a lot of new resources for rural Nebraska, and I know Lincoln and Omaha are hoping to get that grant at some point. But there was a follow-up to the question we talked about earlier, because maybe we didn't quite articulate it, and it is tough, but it's what is the best advice to help get a tenant to acknowledge there's a problem?
I honestly, I'd just be direct and accept that sometimes they may really not understand that there's something wrong. That just may be where they're at. But you can point it out, and you want to be respectful, so you don't want to be critical or, you know, call someone a name or something, but point out what's going on. Or, you know, we've had multiple complaints from other residents that you're knocking on their windows at night, that type of thing. The person may acknowledge, may not, but I think your best bet is always to be direct.
I agree.
Okay. So you know what, we've answered the questions, and I want to just share some information that's happening in for landlord summits, landlord recognition. And I am going to pull a slide up here and share my screen, and I'm going to unmute some people because they are on the call. Right, so bear with me, folks. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to be joined by Tina Murray and Lisa Vukov. I think I can, Tina, if I'm trying to unmute your phone, let me see if I can unmute it for you. And Lisa, so both Lisa and Tina are at the metro area continuum of care for the homeless in Omaha. And for some reason, I can't unmute them. It says that you guys are self-muted. Okay, now Lisa, you should be able to talk.
Yep, can you hear me?
I can't.
Okay, I got an alert that you had unmuted me, but I still needed to unmute myself. So if Tina's trying to figure that out, she may have to hit the button as well.
Okay, so I pulled up your guide for landlords and property managers, and let's see. Can people see my screen now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, go for it, Lisa and Tina.
Tina, do you want to go first? Yes, you are.
I can
Okay,
hear
great.
you.
We hear it together. First off, I'm the crisis engagement director here at Together and the co-lead for MAACH Street Outreach. So we have a couple different programs just even at my agency that deal with people struggling with mental health. We have a pilot program through United Healthcare to stop some utilization things, rapid rehousing and crisis engagement. Our caseworkers do very well at working with landlords and the clients, just trying to teach them how to be better tenants. Some of our case managers are RentWise trained, so they try to work with the client so they learn how to communicate with the landlord better, so we can kind of stop some of those situations from happening. Lisa, do you want to chime in? And I can think of more things to say.
Sure. So the format or the sheet of paper here that John is sharing, we put together, we have a task force that is dedicated to expanding options for housing for all individuals who are experiencing homelessness in our system. One portion of that is continued ongoing engagement with our community-based supportive housing programs, which you'll see listed on this sheet. And John has this and can definitely distribute it. We would love to share this far and wide. But these are the agencies in the Omaha metropolitan area. We have services in Douglas and Sarpy County of Nebraska. And these organizations all provide a form of supportive housing or multiple forms of supportive housing. And we even have included the direct contacts for those organizations on this. Every single one of these organizations provide case management and other supportive services to the tenants that'll be residing in properties. But the big thing that we wanted to really emphasize today are the benefits for landlords to partner with these agencies who have supportive housing. And you'll see those landlord benefits kind of listed at the bottom half of this sheet. Obviously, we have a lot of units and we can drastically reduce your marketing costs, your advertising costs. We have tenants that are ready to move in as soon as units are available. In fact, in the Omaha metro area, Douglas, Sarpy County, we are anticipating through a tremendous increase in funding for supportive housing that came through the CARES Act, that we are going to be seeing anywhere between 100 to 150 additional units of supportive housing that are going to be coming in on an annual basis. And so empty units, we are ready to house folks. Obviously, these programs do also provide for assistance with initial move-in costs, ongoing rental assistance, some of which include the utility payments as well. The big thing here, that I would want to emphasize is it's guaranteed rent from the project that is supporting, and then in some cases the tenant would share a portion of that rent. So it is a subsidy, but it is guaranteed rent. In-home supportive service.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
They also have the case management sometimes for 24 or 18 months, depending on the grant too. So
Yep.
Case managers are very much involved during that time.
Yes. And the second page of the document does go into kind of the differences of the types of supportive housing, what the difference between rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing is. Rapid rehousing includes short to medium term rental assistance. So that's typically anywhere between 3 to 24 months of that rental assistance. Permanent supportive housing is it's very similar, however, it is dedicated to those individuals who are experiencing a disabling condition. And for permanent supportive housing, that supportive service is indefinite. It's as long as the client needs it. So we have folks who have been residing in permanent supportive housing with case management and rental subsidies for 10 plus years. And that doesn't go away as long as the need continues to be there. In addition to the case management, we also have other budgeting, education. We work on just basic home upkeep. The majority of those organizations do have staff who are trained in RentWise. We can step in to address problems early and serve as a mediator in the event of a landlord-tenant dispute, or just even to have some of those conversations on smaller issues that may be going on. Another big thing is we have opportunities to reimburse for damages or rent loss. And on the second page of this document, it actually does go into a mitigation fund that we have available in our community that is designed to assist landlords, to design and assisting in reimbursing landlords for unpaid rent and damages that may occur. So it's kind of almost like a little built-in insurance policy for taking what could be determined to be a risk on somebody who maybe has less of a rental history, or maybe has some, there are other concerns there that they may be viewed as being a less than desirable tenant to take a risk on. We have these this mitigation fund there to help offset some of those concerns. The big thing is we need landlords. We need you to be a part of what we are doing here in Omaha. Like I said, we have the supportive units there. We just need to be able to make the connection with the landlords. And Tina, if you would add anything.
Yeah, I think that just knowing that, I know here at Together we found that if we have one point of contact for the landlords, instead of the landlords feeling like they're getting shifted between case managers and clients. So now we have that one point of contact here, and we have somebody that's willing to go out and talk to the landlords about how our programs work and how different they are. So that way they get a better understanding. Because we just want the landlords to understand that they're, if they have that direct contact, that, if they let us know that there's a problem with the client or their tenant, that we can intervene more quickly and try to provide some of those supportive services, because that's our goal, is to work with them so they can stabilize on their own. We just have to get them connected and get them stabilized so they can be good tenants.
Great, thank you so much, Tina and Lisa. We're kind of running down on time, but I think that was fantastic. And it's sharing some very similar themes that we're hearing across the state. I did just share that the Lincoln Homeless Coalition is doing a landlords summit next week, October 7th. And if you are interested, if you're a landlord and you're interested in participating in that online virtual event, we are putting the contact person in our chat. You'll want to reach out to Neva Winkle with Community Action of Lancaster and Saunders County. And I think Susan's going to put that in the chat. Yep, there she is. So reach out to Neva, go to their Facebook page, the Lincoln Homeless Coalition, and you can find out. But there is definitely a theme of landlords and agencies working together. I was so happy that Arnold mentioned the thank you to the landlords, because obviously these folks can't exist without you. So we really have to figure out a way to partner together as best as possible. I do want to respect a person that asked the question about youth, because they sent a clarifying message, and really what they were asking, and Kristin, this might be similar to what family youth investment programs do. It was specific, what if there is a youth that's living with parents that is being destructive due to mental health issues? So how can you help the youth in that household?
Well, I don't feel like I'm the only one that can answer this, but like as a mom, I feel like I can answer it on a level of there are community resources. There's the Nebraska Family Helpline. And then I would not hesitate to reach out to that home school. The schools are such a resource. They are, I mean, they can be such a resource. And remember, you don't have to disclose everything. I know people are always like, I didn't want the school to know that I had ADHD, or I didn't want the school to know that Dad's struggling with addiction. You don't have to say that. You can just say, Johnny is going through a tough patch, and seeing if there's any additional support. There's, like in Lincoln, I know we have therapy in the schools. We have the wellness recovery. I mentioned the RAP. We have that in the schools. We have peer mentors. They have a new thing with, I can't go and blank on the name. oh, I'm going blank. I don't do a lot with kids anymore, but basically they trained some kids to be advocates, to speak up if somebody's in trouble. They
Is that
trained
Hope Squad?
Hope Squads. Thank you,
Hope
John.
Yeah.
But they've trained kids to say, hey, be a leader, look out for your peers and be an advocate, you know, reach out to an adult. And there's all different kinds of adults at our schools. You know, I know my son personally loves his school resource officer. So, you know, there's all different people. So for me, I would say reach out to your school and disclose only what you want to disclose. I think we have this belief that we have to share everything. I have to say, dad's struggling with addiction, or my, you know, dad's in prison, or you don't have to say that. You can just talk about the symptom and the concern with that specific child and see what the school has for ideas and resources. And then, of course, private counseling, your pediatrician, kind of going down the lower level. But then there are programs like we have here at Region 5 called the Family Youth Investment Program, or the Professional Partner Program. Again, that's a statewide program. It's available, when we showed the map of the region, it is available in all 6 behavioral health regions, the Professional Partner Program. And again, it's usually for kids 19 and under, 19 to 5, because they have to have a diagnosable mental illness. Sometimes we have it before the age of 5, but not often. We actually had a little additional funding, so we're actually serving a little older group now. The 19, Arnold, is it 23 or 24?
24.
24.
Yep.
That's that transition age. Personally, my absolute favorite group to work with is that transition age. I just love that time in their life. They're figuring it out. I don't have to do what mom says anymore. I need to do what I want, but focusing on that. So that's a really long answer, but those are a few of my go-tos when it comes to kid stuff.
I would also add crisis response teams are typically a resource for after hours. And then I would emphasize what Kristin said, reaching out to the schools, because sometimes it's those situations can be a structure issue after school, where you have a parent that's working and a child that's unsupervised, and the school has programs that they can engage that student in after school to provide some of that structure. So I would definitely reach out to the school.
Great comments, great topic. So everything's going to be on our website. We'll have Kristin's PowerPoint. You know, the links to the videos are in the PowerPoint. You should have got those in the chat. We'll share the landlord information that Lisa and Tina presented. Go to Facebook to look up the Lincoln Homeless Coalition for the Landlord Summit. And we have 2 more coming up. And please, when you get that survey, fill it out. Let us know how we did. Let us know what you'd like to hear. Maybe you'd like to hear a whole session on the topic of hoarding, right? That's a big topic. But you know, we could keep these going. We just scheduled 4 to get it started, and I hope everybody sees value in it. Thank you, Kristin, Arnold, and Melissa. You guys are great rock stars. Keep up the great work.
Welcome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.